Man helps woman fix her broken car until she sees his tattoo. Mrs. Margaret gripped the steering wheel tightly as the engine of her red Beetle coughed and died on the shoulder of Interstate 95. The man in the black tank top who stopped to help had the calloused hands of someone familiar with hard work, and when he bent down to check the engine, she saw the eagle tattoo on his arm with the name David written beneath it. "Are you all right?" he asked, noticing she had gone pale. Margaret couldn't take her eyes off that tattoo, that eagle, that name. It was impossible. But there it was, identical to the drawing her son David had made before disappearing 30 years ago. "What's your name?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. "Michael, Ma'am. Michael Thompson," he replied, puzzled by her reaction. Margaret's legs went weak. Michael was the name of David's best friend, the one who had vanished with him that December night in 1994. But this man seemed too old to be the Michael she had known. "That tattoo," she began, but Michael was already back under the hood. "It's old, got it when I was a kid. A silly promise between friends," he said without looking at her, focused on the distributor wires. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just getting started. Now, back to the story." Margaret studied the man more closely. The graying hair, the deep wrinkles around his eyes, the patchy beard. Could it be? She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and searched for an old photo she always kept in her gallery. David and Michael, arms around each other, smiling at the camera on the last Christmas they'd spent together. "Do you know someone named David Wilson?" she ventured. Michael froze. For just a second, just 1 second, she saw something flash in his eyes. Fear, surprise, pain. But then he went back to fiddling with the wires. "Common name, Ma'am. Must be 1,000, David. Wilson's out there." But Margaret noticed how his hands trembled as he reconnected the battery cables. She knew that tremor. It was the same one that overtook her whenever someone mentioned her son's name. The Beetle roared back to life, purring like a contented cat. Michael wiped his hands on a rag and began packing up his tools. Margaret knew she had only minutes before he left. Maybe forever. "My son's name was David Wilson," she said, watching his every reaction. "He disappeared 30 years ago, along with his best friend, Michael Thompson." The tools slipped from his hands, clattering onto the hot asphalt. For a moment, neither of them moved. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the highway, and the only sounds were the Beetle's uneven rumble and the whoosh of passing cars. "You must be mistaken," Michael finally said, bending to pick up the tools. "I don't know any David Wilson," but Margaret saw. She saw the tear he tried to hide, the way his shoulders slumped, the pain he carried. 30 years of secrets were about to unravel right there on the dusty shoulder of a highway. "Michael," she called, and this time it wasn't a question. "I know it's you. A mother never forgets her son's friends." He stood with his back to her, the toolbox in hand, the silence stretched, heavy as lead. When he finally turned, his eyes were red. "Mrs. Margaret." His voice came out hoarse. "Broken. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have found me." "Where's David?" she asked, stepping closer. "Please, I need to know. 30 years, Michael, 30 years without knowing if my son is alive or—" "He's alive," Michael said quickly. "He's alive, but what? Where is he? Why did you disappear? Why did you never come back?" Michael looked down the road as if weighing his options. Margaret could see the conflict on his face, the battle between keeping the secret and telling the truth. "It's complicated, Mrs. Margaret. Very complicated. There are things that happened that night that changed everything." "What things? Michael, please. I'm an old woman. I spent 30 years wondering what happened, thinking—" "My son was dead. You have no idea what it's like to live without knowing." "I do," he replied bitterly. "I have a mother too, Mrs. Margaret, and she must have suffered too." Margaret moved closer, now seeing the scars on his face, marks time hadn't erased. "Then tell me, please. Anything is better than not knowing." Michael took a deep breath. He looked around as if checking if anyone was listening. The highway was relatively empty at that stretch, just the occasional truck passing by, kicking up dust. "I can't talk here," he finally said. "It's not safe." "Safe? Michael, what are you talking about? Mrs. Margaret, do you really think two 20-year-old boys just disappear by chance? Do you think we spent 30 years hiding? For fun? A chill ran down Margaret's spine. All these years she had imagined 1,000 scenarios, accidents, fights, even that the two had run away to try their luck elsewhere. But Michael's tone suggested something far more serious. Are you in danger? Is David in danger? Not anymore, Michael said. At least we thought not. But if you recognized me, others might too. Others who? Michael, you're scaring me. He ran a hand over his face, a weary gesture from someone who'd carried a burden too long. There's a place, he finally said. A diner at the edge of Pittsburgh. Pete's Diner, know it? Margaret nodded. It was a simple place, mostly frequented by truckers. Meet me there tomorrow noon. Come alone. And Mrs. Margaret... He hesitated. Don't tell anyone you saw me. No one at all. But, Michael, please, for David, if you really want to find your son, you have to trust me. He started to walk away, but Margaret grabbed his arm. Her fingers brushed the eagle tattoo and she felt Michael stiffen. This tattoo, David drew it, didn't he? He was always good at drawing. Michael looked at his own arm, as if seeing the tattoo for the first time in years. It was his. Last drawing before... He stopped. We got them together, him and me, to seal a promise. What promise? That we'd protect each other, no matter what. Michael laughed dryly. We were young, thought the world was simple. And did you keep it? The promise? Michael met her eyes for the first time since she'd mentioned David. To this day, Mrs. Margaret. To this day. He walked to his truck, a faded blue Ford F-150 that had seen better days. Margaret stood on the shoulder watching him drive off, her heart racing. 30 years of questions. And now, finally, some answers seemed within reach. But what answers? Would they be? What had happened that December night that changed everything? And most importantly, where was David now? Margaret got into the Beetle, her hands still shaking. The car was running perfectly now, as if Michael had a magic touch. Or maybe it was just years of practice fixing old cars, hidden who knows where. On the drive back home to Harrisburg, Margaret couldn't stop thinking. Michael Thompson was alive. After 30 years, she had a lead. And David. David was alive too. That alone was worth all the years of anguish. But why hadn't they come back? What had kept them hidden so long? When she got home, Margaret went straight to the room she'd kept exactly as David had left it. The posters of local rock bands, the college prep books piled on the desk, the guitar in the corner, all covered by a thin layer of dust that she religiously cleaned every week. On the wall, drawings. David always drew. Landscapes, portraits, and eagles. Several eagles in different poses and styles, but one in particular caught her attention. It was identical to Michael's tattoo, with wings spread and talons extended. Below it, a date, 12/15/1994, 3 days before the disappearance. Mrs. Margaret picked up the drawing, noticing for the first time something written on the back in David's handwriting. When the eagle flies, fate follows. When two fly together, nothing can stop them. What did that mean? Was it just teenage poetry, or was there more to it? She went to the kitchen and brewed a strong cup of coffee. It was going to be a long night. She began sifting through boxes of old photos and documents, searching for anything that might have been overlooked at the time. That's when she found it, a newspaper clipping from January 1995, a month after the disappearance. The headline was about a fire in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. 2 unidentified victims. Back then, Mrs. Margaret had read the news with her heart in her throat, fearing it might be David and Michael. But the investigation concluded the victims were older, likely homeless. Now rereading the article with fresh eyes, something stood out. The warehouse belonged to Hamilton Construction, the company owned by Richard Hamilton's father. Richard had been David and Michael's classmate in school, but they were never close. On the contrary, Mrs. Margaret remembered David complaining about Richard bullying and taunting them. Could it be a coincidence that the fire happened so close to the boy's disappearance? The phone rang, snapping Mrs. Margaret out of her thoughts. It was her sister, Susan. "Margaret, did you get home okay? I was worried. You left so suddenly." Mrs. Margaret had gone to visit her sister in Philadelphia and was on her way back when the car broke down. Now it felt like fate. "Yes, Sue, everything's fine." "Are you sure? Your voice sounds strange." Mrs. Margaret hesitated. Michael had asked her not to tell anyone, but Susan was her sister, her lifelong confidant. "Sue," she began, but then she remembered the tone in Michael's voice, the fear in his eyes. "I'm just tired. The trip was long." "Get some rest then. Call me if you need anything, okay?" Hanging up the phone, Mrs. Margaret felt more alone than ever. For the first time in 30 years, she had a lead about her son, but she couldn't share it with anyone. She spent the rest of the night going through photos, letters, anything that might offer more clues. She found a picture of David with Michael and some friends at a summer festival 6 months before the disappearance. Everyone smiling, carefree. In the background of the photo, blurred but recognizable, was Richard Hamilton. He wasn't smiling. At 3 a.m, exhausted, Mrs. Margaret finally went to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept processing the information. Michael alive, David alive. Hidden for 30 years. Danger, secrets. What had happened that December night? The next morning, Mrs. Margaret woke up with a determination she hadn't felt in years. She had her coffee, carefully chose a discreet outfit, and double-checked the restaurant's address. Pete's Diner, just outside Pittsburgh. She knew the place. She'd stopped there a few times over the years. The drive from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh took about an hour and a half. Mrs. Margaret left early, wanting to arrive with time to spare. Along the way, 1,000 scenarios played out in her head. What would it be like to see David again? Did he have a family, children? Where? Did he live? Why did Michael seem so afraid? She arrived at the diner at 11:30. The place was just as she remembered, simple, clean, smelling of fried fish and homemade seasoning. She chose a corner table where she could see the entrance and ordered a coffee. At noon sharp, Michael walked in. He had swapped the tank top for a long-sleeved shirt that covered his tattoos. He glanced around carefully before approaching the table. "Did you come alone?" he asked before even sitting down. "I did." "Michael, please tell me what's going on." He sat, ordered a coffee from the waitress, and waited for her to walk away. "Mrs. Margaret, before anything else, you need to understand one thing. Everything we did was to protect the people we love. David especially thought of you." "Protect from what?" "Michael, you were 20 years old. What could 2 boys have done that was so serious?" Michael laughed bitterly. "We didn't do anything, Mrs. Margaret. That was the problem. We were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and we saw something we shouldn't have." Margaret felt her heart race. "What did you see?" Michael looked around again, lowering his voice. "Do you remember Richard Hamilton? The son of the construction company owner?" "I remember. He went to school with you." "Right. But Richard wasn't just the spoiled rich kid we thought he was. He was mixed up in some heavy stuff, Mrs. Margaret. Really heavy stuff." "What kind of stuff?" "The night we disappeared, David and I were coming back from a party. We cut through the old warehouse at the construction site because it was a shortcut, but the warehouse wasn't empty." Michael paused, took a sip of coffee. Margaret could see how painful it was for him to relive that night. "Richard was there with some other guys. They had—" Michael hesitated. "They had someone. They were torturing the guy, trying to get information about something. When they saw us—" "Oh my God!" Margaret covered her mouth with her hand. "They came after us. David and I ran, split up to throw them off. We agreed to meet at the bus station. We were going to take the first bus out of town, wait for things to cool down, and then come back to report everything. But you never came back. We couldn't. The next day, the warehouse burned down, with 2 people inside. The news said they were homeless, but Mrs. Margaret—" Michael lowered his voice even further. "They were 2 guys who worked for a competitor of Richard's father. This was way bigger than 2 scared kids could have imagined." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting. Now back to the story. Margaret's hands felt icy. Her son and Michael had witnessed a crime, maybe something tied to a business rivalry that ended in tragedy. And you ran away. What else could we do? If we'd come back, we'd have been next. Richard's father had connections everywhere. Judges, cops, politicians. There was no one to turn to. But 30 years, Michael. You vanished for 30 years. At first we thought it'd be temporary, a few months, maybe a year. But then Richard's father kept growing, the company became an empire. Richard took over the business and Michael paused. The things he did in that warehouse became the family's unofficial business. You get what I'm saying? Margaret understood. Her son had witnessed the beginning of something much bigger and more dangerous than a crime of passion. Where did you go? How did you survive? We went to the south first, Florida, Louisiana. We moved towns every year, worked in garages, farms, anything that didn't require paperwork. David. Michael smiled for the first time. David became a damn good mechanic, always had a way with his hands. And why didn't you reach out to me? A letter, a phone call, anything. We tried, Mrs. Margaret. I swear we did. But every time. We got close, something happened. Once David called from a payphone in New Orleans. The next day, 2 guys showed up asking questions at the boarding house where we were staying. We had to run again. Did they know you were alive? They knew, and they looked for us for years. They only stopped when... Michael hesitated. When what? When they thought we had died. There was a bus accident in 2003 in the Appalachian Mountains. 20 dead, bodies burned beyond recognition. 2 of the victims were never identified. At the time, David and I were working on a farm nearby. When we heard about the accident, you let them think it was you. It was the opportunity we'd been waiting for. We stopped running, created new identities. David became Robert Smith, a mechanic. I became Michael Brown. Brown? Margaret noticed the switch. David chose it, said it meant he'd always carry a piece of you with him. Margaret couldn't hold back her tears. 30 years. 30 years her son had lived under a false name, carrying her maiden name as his only link to home. Where is he now, Michael, please? Michael looked at her for a long moment. In Lancaster. He has a small, discreet auto shop. He's married, Mrs. Margaret. 2 kids, a 15-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. I have grandchildren, Margaret whispered, tears now flowing freely. You do. Robert, after his adoptive father, and Margaret, after the grandmother he thought he'd never meet. Margaret sobbed. Her grandson was named Robert, but her granddaughter bore her name. I need to see him, Michael. I need to see my son. I know, and he needs to see you too, but Mrs. Margaret, there's something you should know. What else could there be? Richard Hamilton died last year. Heart attack, according to the papers. But there are rumors it was a cleanup. His son, Richard Jr., took over everything. And he's worse than his father. But if Richard is dead, the secrets aren't, Mrs. Margaret. Worse, Jr. is cleaning house, eliminating anyone who could tie the family to past crimes. Last week, their former accountant turned up dead in Chicago. Suicide, the news said. Margaret understood. David and Michael were witnesses to how it all began. If they were found, so what do we do? I have a plan, but I need to know if you're willing to do whatever it takes to see your son again. Anything, Michael. Anything. Even if it means leaving Harrisburg, your home, your memories? Margaret didn't hesitate. I spent 30 years in that house waiting for David to come back. If he can't come to me, I'll go to him. Michael nodded, looking relieved. I'll arrange everything. I need to talk to David first. Prepare. Him. His heart hasn't been well, Mrs. Margaret. The stress of all these years took its toll. What's wrong? High blood pressure, arrhythmia. Doctors say he has the heart of a 70-year-old, not a 50-year-old. Life on the run ages you. Margaret studied Michael again. Now that she was paying attention, she could see the signs. The deep wrinkles, the premature grey hair, the exhaustion. In his eyes. They'd aged 20 years in 30. When can I see him? Give me a week. I need to make arrangements, ensure it's safe. Can you be away for a while? I can say I'm visiting my sister in Philadelphia. Stay there a few days. Perfect. But Mrs. Margaret, you need to understand. When you see David, there can't be any scene. He's Robert Smith to everyone. His wife knows the truth, but the kids don't. To them, their paternal grandparents died before they were born. I understand. And one more thing. Michael hesitated. David has changed. He's not the 20-year-old boy you knew. Life's been hard on him, on me too, but David carries a guilt I could never lift from him. Guilt over what? Leaving you. Every night for 30 years, he's blamed himself for it. Said he'd rather have died than make you suffer. But he had no choice. Try telling that to a son who loves his mother, Mrs. Margaret. Logic doesn't work when the heart's involved. They talked a while longer, finalizing details. Michael gave her a prepaid phone for contact and precise instructions. No calls from the home phone, no comments to anyone, nothing that could raise suspicions. When Margaret returned home, she felt like she was in a dream or a nightmare. She wasn't sure anymore. Her son was alive, had a family, but lived in hiding after witnessing crimes committed by a powerful family. That night, she packed some clothes and personal items. She took David's photo album, some of his drawings, small mementos. If she was starting a new life to be close to her son, she'd take a piece of the old one with her. The next day, she called Susan. "Sue, I was thinking of spending some time with you. I've been feeling lonely." "Of course, sis, come. Whenever you want. It's been a while since we've spent time together." It was a lie, and Margaret hated lying to her sister. But it was necessary. For now. The following days passed in a haze of anxiety. Margaret sold some things, organized. Documents prepared her departure discreetly. Every moment she expected the phone to ring with news from Michael. Finally, on Thursday, the prepaid phone rang. "Mrs. Margaret, everything's arranged. Can you come to Philadelphia tomorrow?" "I can, and then? I'll pick you up Saturday morning. We'll drive to Lancaster." David is anxious and scared. So am I. That's normal. 30 years is a long time, but it'll all work out, you'll see. Margaret didn't sleep that night. The next day, she drove to Philadelphia with her heart racing. Susan welcomed her with her usual warmth, suspecting nothing. "You seem off, Margaret. Are you sure everything's okay?" "It's just age, Sue. We're getting older, more sentimental." Susan didn't seem convinced, but didn't press further. On Saturday morning, Margaret said she was going to the mall. Instead, she met Michael at a gas station on the outskirts of town. He was in a different truck with Chicago plates. "Precaution," he explained. "You never know who's watching." The trip to Lancaster took 3 hours. Michael drove in silence, occasionally checking the mirrors. Margaret clutched her purse on her lap, where she kept photos of young David. "How is he?" she asked, when she couldn't bear the silence any longer. "Nervous. Last night his blood pressure spiked. His wife, Jennifer, almost took him to the hospital." "Did he tell her about me?" "He told her everything when they got married. Jennifer's a good woman, Mrs. Margaret. She took care of him when no one else could. You'll like her." As they entered Lancaster, Margaret's stomach twisted. In just a few minutes, she'd see her son, after 30 years. Michael turned onto a quiet residential street, with simple but well-kept houses. He stopped in front of a blue house with a small front garden. "This is it," he said simply. Margaret looked at the house, ordinary, discreet. Nothing that would draw attention. The perfect house for someone who wanted to stay hidden. "Is he there?" "He is." Waiting. Margaret took a deep breath. 30 years leading to this moment. She stepped out of the car on shaky legs. Michael guided her to the door and rang the bell in a specific pattern. 2 long rings, 3 short ones. A code, Margaret realized. Even after all these years, the caution. The door opened. A brunette woman in her 40s appeared. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. "Mrs. Margaret?" she asked softly. "I'm Jennifer, welcome." Margaret stepped inside, her heart pounding. The living room was simple, cozy. Family photos hung on the walls. A man she didn't immediately recognize. 2 smiling children. And then she saw him. Standing in the kitchen doorway, a 50-year-old man watched her. His hair was graying, his face marked by time, his body heavier. But his eyes were the same. The eyes of her David. "Mom?" His voice came out hoarse, choked. Margaret couldn't answer. The tears came before the words. 30 years of longing exploded in that moment. David crossed the room in 2 strides and hugged her. Mother and son, finally reunited, wept in each other's arms as the world outside ceased to exist. "Forgive me, Mum," David sobbed. "Forgive me for disappearing, for making you suffer." "There's nothing to forgive, my son. You're alive, you're here, that's all that matters." They held each other for long minutes. Jennifer and Michael watched from the doorway, moved. When they finally pulled apart, David guided her to the sofa. "Let me look at you," he said, holding her hands. "You're beautiful, Mum. Time has been kind." "To you too," Mrs. Margaret lied tenderly. Time had not been kind to David. She could see that. But he was alive, and that was what mattered. "Mom, this is Jennifer, my wife," David introduced formally. "And these," and he pointed to a picture frame, "are Robert and Margaret, your grandchildren." "Margaret." Her voice faltered. "You named your daughter Margaret." "It was the only way. To keep you close," David said, tears returning. "Every time I call my daughter, it's like calling you." They spent the afternoon talking. David told her about the years on the run, the odd jobs, the constant fear, how he met Jennifer at a church in Pennsylvania, how she helped him rebuild a life. "She knew I carried secrets," David explained, "but she accepted me anyway. When I finally told her everything, she didn't run. She stayed." Jennifer smiled, squeezing her husband's hand. "What's love for if not the hard times?" she said simply. Mrs. Margaret heard about her grandchildren. Robert, 15, wanting to be an engineer. Margaret, 12, passionate about drawing like her grandfather. "She has your talent," Mrs. Margaret said, remembering David's sketches. "She really does. Sometimes it scares me how similar they are. It's like the talent skipped a generation." Around 4 in the afternoon, the front door opened and 2 children came running in. They stopped abruptly when they saw the visitor. "Dad?" The boy, Robert, looked curiously. "Come here," David called. "I want you to meet someone very special. This is—" He hesitated. "I'm an old family friend," Mrs. Margaret finished, understanding. "Nice to meet you." The girl, Margaret, stepped forward shyly. She had the same eyes as her father, her grandfather, the same curious expression David had as a child. "Did you know my dad when he was young?" she asked. "I did. He was a very special boy." "He still is," the girl said proudly, and everyone laughed. Dinner was a mix of joy and tension. Mrs. Margaret wanted to know every detail of her grandchildren's lives, but had to restrain herself from seeming too intrusive. David watched her constantly, as if afraid she might vanish. When the children went to their rooms to do homework, the adults returned to the living room. The mood grew heavier. "What now?" Mrs. Margaret asked. "How do we make this work?" "I was thinking," Michael began, "you could move here, find a house nearby, be the friendly neighbor who becomes part of the family." "But what about Harrisburg?" "My home? You could sell it," David suggested, "or rent it." "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask, but—" "It's not too much," Mrs. Margaret interrupted. "I spent 30 years in that house waiting for you to come back. If you can't go, I'll come." "Are you sure? What about Aunt Sue?" "She'll understand eventually, when we can tell her the truth." "That may never happen, Mom. As long as the Hamiltons have power, then so be it," Mrs. Margaret said firmly. "I'd rather have you under a false name than not at all." They worked out the details. Mrs. Margaret would return to Harrisburg, get her affairs in order, sell the house. Michael would help her find something in Lancaster discreetly. "It'll take a few months," Michael warned. "It has to look natural, no rush. Any sudden moves could draw attention." When the time came to leave, the goodbye was painful. David hugged her as if it were the last time. "Promise you'll come back?" he asked, looking 20 years younger again. "I promise. Now that I've found you, nothing will keep me away again." On the way back, Michael was more relaxed. "It went well," he remarked. "Better than I expected." "David seems fragile," Margaret observed. "He's strong, Mrs. Margaret. He survived 30 years in exile, but seeing you stirred something in him. All the emotions he buried came rushing back at once." "And what about you, Michael? Don't you have family?" Michael was silent for a moment. "I did. I got married once down in Georgia. It lasted 3 years. She couldn't handle the life of secrets, of always moving. She left me a letter saying she loved me but couldn't live with a ghost. I'm so sorry. It was for the best. David. Was lucky with Jennifer. I learned to live alone. My family is David and his family. It's enough. Margaret returned to Philadelphia with a divided heart. Joy at having found her son, sadness at having to leave him again, anxiety about the next steps. Susan noticed the change immediately. Margaret, what happened? You left sad and came back as different. I've made a decision, Sue. I'm moving. Moving? Where to? Lancaster. I met some people there, felt at home. Harrisburg has too many memories. Susan didn't seem convinced, but supported her sister's decision. Back in Harrisburg, Margaret began her preparations. She put the house up for sale, started sorting what to take and what to donate. Every object held a memory, but now the memories didn't hurt as much. David was alive. The rest was just details. 2 weeks later, the prepaid phone rang. Mrs. Margaret, it's Michael. We have a problem. Her heart froze. What happened? Is David okay? For now, but yesterday 2 men showed up at the shop asking questions. They said they were from an insurance company, but David recognized their manner. They're investigators. Oh God, do they know? Not yet, but they're sniffing around. Someone must have seen you with me the day the car broke down. Put 2 and 2 together. What do we do? For now, nothing. Carry on with your plans as usual. But Mrs. Margaret, when you come here, you'll have to be even more careful. No direct contact with David for a while. Margaret felt desperation rising. She had just found her son. Could she lose him again? Michael, I can't lose him again. I won't survive it. You won't lose him, I promise. We've spent 30 years running. We know how to take care of ourselves. But I need you to be strong now. Margaret took a deep breath. She had waited 30 years. She could wait a little longer. In the following weeks, she kept to her normal routine. The house sold relatively quickly to a young couple who fell in love with the garden. Margaret packed her most important belongings and donated the rest. Moving day arrived. Susan came to help, still skeptical. Are you sure about this, Margaret? Leaving everything behind like this? I'm not leaving. Sue, I'm starting over. At 70. Better late than never. The house in Lancaster that Michael had arranged was small but cozy. It was 10 minutes from David's place in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for a retired woman wanting peace. The move went smoothly. Margaret settled in, met the neighbors, established a routine. She went to the market, the farmer's market, church, an ordinary woman living an ordinary retirement, but every Tuesday and Thursday, by chance, she passed by David's shop. Sometimes he was at the gate, and they'd wave at each other. Sometimes the kids were there after school and they'd chat a bit. Gradually, naturally, she became part of their lives. You're really nice, little Margaret said one day. You remind me of my grandma. Margaret had to hold back tears. That's so sweet of you to say, dear. It's true. You have kind eyes like my dad says his mother had. David, who was nearby, turned pale, but the girl didn't notice anything strange and kept chattering about school. A month passed, then 2. Life was settling into a new normal. Mrs. Margaret came over for dinner once a week, always as the nice neighbor. The kids grew fond of her. Jennifer became a close friend, but the shadow of danger never fully disappeared. Michael would drop by occasionally with updates. Investigators were still lurking. Questions were still being asked. The Hamiltons hadn't given up. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe. So to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. It was on a Sunday afternoon that everything changed. Margaret was at David's house, helping Jennifer with lunch, when Robert burst in running. Dad! There's a strange man outside taking pictures of the house. David and Michael, who was visiting, exchanged glances. In seconds, the mood shifted. Michael went to the window, peeking discreetly. It's him, he said simply. Who? Jennifer asked, already knowing the answer. A Hamilton investigator, the same one who showed up at the shop last month. What does he want? Margaret asked, fear clear in her voice. Confirmation, David answered. They suspect, but they're not sure. They need proof. So what do we do? David looked at his family gathered in the living room. His mother, who had just recovered. His wife, who had stood by him for 15 years. His children, innocent of everything. "We run," he finally said. "Again." "No," Margaret nearly shouted. "You can't run again, not now." "Mom, we don't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Jennifer cut in. "David, I'm tired of running. The kids are growing up. They have friends, school. We can't just yank them away." "Then what do you suggest, that we wait for them to come get us?" "That we stand our ground," Michael said suddenly. Everyone turned to him. 30 years, David. 30 years on the run. Maybe it's time to stop. Stand our ground how? They have power, money, connections. And we have the truth, Michael argued. What we saw that night. We never told anyone, but we can tell it now. Who to? Who's going to believe two mechanics against an empire? I know who, Margaret said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. Jessica Palmer. Who? David asked. An investigative journalist. She's won awards for exposing corruption schemes. Gave a talk in Harrisburg last year. She looks for stories. Exactly like this. It's risky, Michael weighed in. Riskier than living on the run, Jennifer challenged. At least this way we have a chance to end it for good. David rubbed his face, the weight of the decision clear. And if it goes wrong? If they come after my family? They're already coming, Margaret pointed out. The question is, do we keep running forever, or do we fight now? Silence stretched. Outside, the investigator kept watching. The kids, sensing the tension without understanding, huddled close to their parents. Dad, what's happening? Little Margaret asked. David looked at his daughter, then at his son. Two innocent kids who never asked to be born into a life of secrets. He looked at Jennifer, the woman who'd stayed by his side through everything. At Michael, the friend who'd sacrificed his own life to protect him. And finally, at his mother, who had waited 30 years. We fight, he said at last. No more running. Michael nodded, a weary smile on his face. About time. I'll reach out to the journalist, discreetly. And the kids? Jennifer asked. They'll stay with my sister for a few days, David decided, until we sort this out. But Dad, Robert started to protest. No arguments. It's for your safety. In the days that followed, everything moved fast. Michael managed to contact Jessica Palmer through intermediaries. The journalist, sensing a big story, agreed to meet them. The meeting took place at a hotel in Philadelphia. Jessica was a woman in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that always seemed to search for the truth behind appearances. 30 years is a long time to keep a secret, she remarked after hearing the story. Why speak up now? Because we're tired, David answered. And because they won't stop. Richard Jr. is cleaning up his father's past, eliminating witnesses. Do you have proof, besides your testimony? We have this, Michael said, pulling out an old envelope. I kept it all these years. These are photos of the warehouse, taken with a disposable camera David had that day. They don't show the crime, but they show the cars, the people going in. Jessica examined the photos. Old, faded, but still visible. This helps, but it's not enough. We need more. Documents, other testimonies, anything that links the Hamiltons to the crimes. There's one person, David said hesitantly. Dr. Richardson, the family's old lawyer. He retired right after that night, lives in a nursing home now. I always suspected he knew something. I'll look into it, Jessica promised. But understand this. Once this story breaks, there's no going back. The Hamiltons will react. You need to be ready. We've been ready for 30 years, Michael said. In the following weeks, Jessica worked discreetly. She discovered that Dr. Richardson, now 85, was indeed in a nursing home. More importantly, he was willing to talk. Guilty conscience, the old lawyer said when Jessica visited him. I helped cover up a lot, thinking it was just business. But that night was too much. He confirmed that Richard Hamilton, Sr. had ordered the torture and subsequent elimination of two rival businessmen, that the warehouse fire was meant to destroy evidence, and that two boys had witnessed everything. Hamilton spent years looking for them, the lawyer revealed. Spent fortunes on investigators, became obsessed, said as long as they were alive, they were a threat. With the lawyer's testimony and the photos, Jessica had a story. But before, publishing. She wanted to ensure David and Michael's safety. "I'll talk to the federal prosecutor," she said. "This is federal crime, organized crime. If we can get protection..." That's when things escalated. Someone in the prosecutor's office leaked the information. Within hours, the Hamiltons knew David and Michael were alive and about to talk. Margaret's phone rang at 3 a.m. It was Jennifer, panicked. "Mrs. Margaret, they took David." Margaret felt the world spin. "What do you mean they took him?" "Men came in, said it was a family matter, that they'd talk and settle everything. David went to protect us. Michael tried to stop them, got beaten. He's in the hospital." Margaret dressed in a hurry and rushed to the hospital. Michael was conscious but hurt, broken ribs, a swollen face. "They took him, Mrs. Margaret," he said weakly. "I couldn't stop them." "Where? We have to call someone." "We already did. Jessica alerted the feds, but they need to know where they took David." The next few hours were the longest of Margaret's life. The news spread fast. The feds launched an operation. Jessica, seeing the urgency, published the story online immediately. "Empire of Crime: How the Hamilton Family Built a Fortune on Blood and Fear." The story exploded. Within hours, it was on every news site. Dr. Richardson's testimony, the photos, the story of 2 young men who lived 30 years in exile for witnessing crimes. Public pressure was immediate. Richard Jr. tried to deny it, but more witnesses came forward. Former employees, extorted businessmen, families of the missing. Then Michael's phone rang. Unknown number. "We want to make a deal," the voice said. "Your friend for your silence." "Ties to too late," Michael replied. "The story's already out. The whole United States knows." "Then your friend pays the price. If anything happens to him, you're finished for good. You'd better release David now and try to cut a deal with the law." There was silence on the other end. Michael could almost hear the calculations being made. With public opinion outraged and the feds closing in, hurting David would be suicide. 6 hours later, David was found in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Lancaster, scared, dehydrated, but alive. The men guarding him fled when they realized the net was closing. The reunion at the hospital was emotional. Mrs. Margaret hugged her son, Jennifer cried with relief, and the kids, rushed over from their aunt's house, clung to their father. "It's over," David said, still processing. "After 30 years, it's finally over." But it wasn't over. Not completely. Richard Jr. was arrested 2 weeks later, charged with racketeering, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. The investigation uncovered decades of crimes, dating back to his father's time. David and Michael had to testify. Those were hard days, reliving old traumas. But this time they weren't alone. They had family, they had support, they had the truth on their side. The trial dragged on for months. With each hearing, more dirt came to light. The Hamilton empire collapsed spectacularly. Companies were seized, accounts frozen, accomplices arrested. During that time, Mrs. Margaret moved into David's house for good. There was no more need for pretense. The kids learned she was their real grandmother, not just the nice neighbor. "Why didn't you tell us before?" little Margaret asked. "Because we wanted to protect you," David explained. "Sometimes adults keep secrets to protect the ones they love." "But secrets hurt," the girl observed with wisdom beyond her years. "That's true," Mrs. Margaret agreed. "That's why we don't have any more secrets now." The adjustment wasn't easy. Robert and young Margaret had to come to terms with the fact that their father had another name, another life, that they'd lived a lie, even if for protection. It was Jennifer who held the family together through the turmoil. "What matters is that we're together," she kept saying. "The past is past. Now we build the future." Michael, recovered from his injuries, decided to stay in Lancaster too. After 30 years as David's foster brother, he was family. "I'm opening my own shop," he announced. "I've run enough. Time to put down roots." The legal proceedings dragged on for 2 years. Richard Jr. got 25 years in prison. Other members of the organization were convicted too. Dr. Richardson, given his age and cooperation, got house arrest. David and Michael were cleared of any crimes. Officially, they existed again. They could reclaim their real names, their documents, their histories. It was on a sunny Sunday, 3 years after Mrs. Margaret had found Michael on the road, that the whole family gathered for a barbecue. David at the grill, Jennifer setting the table, the kids playing in the yard. It was worth it, Mrs. Margaret told Michael. All the suffering was worth it for this moment. 30 years is a long time, Michael agreed, but at least we're here to tell the story. Robert, now 18, walked over. Grandma, Dad said you kept his room all these years. I did. It was my way of holding on to hope. Can I see it someday? I want to know what my dad was like before. Mrs. Margaret smiled, tears in her eyes. Of course you can. We'll all go. It's part of our story. Little Margaret came running up, a paper in her hand. Grandma, I drew this for you. It was an eagle, wings spread, soaring above clouds. At the bottom, in childish handwriting, to fly high, sometimes we have to land first. David looked at the drawing and smiled. She's got the gift, he said simply. Like her grandfather, Mrs. Margaret replied. Like her great-grandmother. Too, David revealed. Do you remember the drawings Grandma used to make, Mum? You thought I didn't know, but I kept every one of them. It was true. Margaret used to draw when she was young, before the responsibilities of adulthood took up all her time. David had inherited and passed on the gift. When the sun set and the children went to sleep, the adults stayed on the porch. The silence was comfortable now, no longer heavy with secrets. You know what hurts the most? David said suddenly. The lost years. I could have watched my mother grow older day by day, been there. Instead you survived. Margaret interrupted and gave me grandchildren, and now we have all the time in the world. Do you really forgive me for all the suffering? There's nothing to forgive, my son. You did what you had to do, and in the end, we're together. That's what matters. Susan came by for afternoon coffee. After the revelation, she had been hurt that Margaret had lied, but she understood. 30 years, she said, still processing it. How did you bear it, sis? One day at a time, Margaret replied, and with hope, always hope. The two sisters now split their time between Lancaster and Philadelphia. Susan grew fond of her grandnieces and nephews, making up for lost time. David's garage thrived with the publicity from the case. People came from far away to meet the mechanic who had lived in hiding for 30 years. David handled his reluctant fame with humor. I survived the Hamiltons, he joked. I can handle a few curious customers. Michael opened his own garage on the other side of town. The two friends, bound by tragedy and loyalty, were now informal business partners too, referring customers to each other. One morning, Margaret woke to the phone ringing. It was Jessica Palmer. Mrs. Margaret, I'm writing a book about the case. I'd like your perspective, the mother who waited 30 years. Margaret thought for a moment. You can come, but bring time. There are many years to tell. The book was released a year later. The Eagle Returns to the Nest, a story of crime, exile, and redemption. It became a bestseller, but more importantly, it became a historical document about the power of hope and family love. At the book launch, Margaret watched David sign copies, uncomfortable but determined. Jennifer by his side, their children proud. Michael in a corner, still preferring the shadows but present. We made it, Margaret murmured to herself. Despite everything, we made it. The wounds of the past healed slowly. David still had nightmares sometimes. Michael still checked doors and windows obsessively. Margaret still woke up occasionally thinking it had all been a dream. But every morning reality reaffirmed itself. David stopped by for coffee before work. The grandchildren came by after school. Jennifer brought cake on Sundays. Michael came for the monthly barbecue. A family. Imperfect, marked by time and pain, but a family. On the 5th anniversary of their reunion, they threw a big party. Friends David and Michael had made during their exile came from different states. Witnesses to the double life they'd led, now celebrating their freedom. You're an inspiration, said Jim, a farmer from Florida who had employed them for years without asking questions. It shows doing the right thing is always worth it, even when the cost is high. Margaret gave an emotional speech. They say time heals all wounds. It's not true. Some wounds turn into scars we carry forever. But I've learned that scars are also proof of survival, that we've been through the worst and are still here. David and Michael carry scars from 30 years in exile. I carry scars from 30 years of waiting. But we're here together, and that's what matters. David hugged his mother, tears flowing freely. There was no more need to hide emotions, to pretend to be strong. True strength, they had learned, was in being vulnerable with those you love. Robert, now in engineering school, raised a toast. To my father, who taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right, despite the fear. To Michael, who proved that true friendship knows neither time nor distance. And to my grandmother, who showed me that hope isn't passive waiting, it's continuing to live while you wait. Little Margaret, now a teenager and looking even more like her father and grandmother, showed a painting she had made. It was the whole family together, but in the background, subtle yet clear, was the silhouette of an eagle in flight. To remember where we came from, she explained, and where we're going. Michael, usually quiet at gatherings, stood up. I spent 30 years thinking I had lost everything, family, identity, future. But looking around now, I see I've gained so much more. I've gained a chosen family. David isn't just my friend, he's my brother. Mrs. Margaret isn't just his mother, she's mine too. Jennifer, Robert, Margaret, you're the family I chose and the family that chose me. Thank you for never giving up. The celebration lasted late into the night. Stories were told and retold, some painful, others funny. The tale of two lives lived in the shadows, now celebrated in the light. When everyone had left and the house grew quiet, Margaret sat on the porch with David and Jennifer. You know what I've learned from all this? Margaret said. That love is stronger than fear, that the truth, no matter how long it takes, always comes out, and that family is more than blood. It's choice, it's persistence, it's forgiveness. You taught me that, David replied, by waiting all those years, never giving up. I couldn't give up, Margaret said simply. A mother doesn't give up on her child. And a child doesn't give up on his mother, David added, even when it seems like he did. Every day apart I thought of you. Every tough decision, I asked myself what you would do. You were with me, even when you weren't. Jennifer squeezed both their hands, and now we're all together for good. For good, Margaret agreed. The stars shone over Lancaster. Somewhere in town, Michael was likely in his garage, working on some old car, finding peace in the manual labor. The grandchildren slept soundly, with no more secrets left to uncover. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the night breeze. 30 years of waiting, 3 years of rebuilding. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of despair had been worth it, because in the end, love won, as it always does when we refuse to give up. The eagle tattoo that started this whole story was now a symbol not of escape but of freedom, of two lives that flew far but found their way back to the nest, and in that nest, a rebuilt family proved every day that there's no distance love can't cross, no time love won't wait out, no secret love won't forgive. The end of the story. And you, dear listener, have you ever gone through a painful separation? Share your story of reunion and overcoming in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.